The telegram arrived on a Thursday morning in June 1885, and it shattered every illusion Delilah Preston had carefully constructed about her prospects for marriage at 34 years old. She stood in the dusty telegraph office in Philadelphia, her gloved fingers trembling as she unfolded the thin paper for the third time, certain she had misread the words, but they remained unchanged, stark and brutal in their brevity. Mother passed. Stop. Father needs care. Stop. Come home. Stop. Her younger sister's signature followed, and beneath it, a postscript that made Delilah's stomach twist. Bring a husband if you can. Cowboys here only want young brides. The last sentence wasn't meant to be cruel, Delilah knew. Sarah was simply stating what everyone believed to be true in the frontier towns scattered across Colorado territory. Men wanted wives who could bear them many children, who had years of work ahead of them, who hadn't yet developed opinions that contradicted their husbands' wishes. At 34, Delilah was considered past her prime by most standards, certainly by the standards of Golden, Colorado, the mining town she'd fled 12 years earlier with dreams of becoming a teacher in the refined East. She had succeeded in that dream, at least partially. She taught literature and composition at a respectable girls' academy, lived in a modest boarding house, and had earned the respect of her colleagues. But she had never married, had never even come close, despite her mother's letters over the years pleading with her to find a suitable match. Now her mother was gone, and her father, according to Sarah's telegram, had suffered some kind of decline that required Delilah's immediate return. The journey west took 6 days by train, and with each passing mile, Delilah felt herself transforming backward in time. The cities gave way to towns, the towns to settlements, until finally the train deposited her in Golden on a scorching afternoon that made her wool traveling dress feel like a punishment. The town had grown since she'd left, sprawling outward from the original cluster of buildings near Clear Creek. New shops lined Washington Avenue, and the territorial Capitol building stood proud against the backdrop of the Rocky Mountains, though she'd heard Denver was lobbying to steal that designation. Sarah met her at the station with a buckboard wagon driven by a gangly teenage boy Delilah didn't recognize. Her sister looked older, harder somehow, though she was only 29. The mountain sun had weathered her face, and her hands were rough as she embraced Delilah. "You came alone," Sarah said, and there was disappointment in her voice. "I had no husband to bring," Delilah replied, lifting her trunk into the wagon bed. "The telegram was rather sudden for me to acquire one." Sarah didn't smile at the attempt at humor. "Father's not well, Del. He doesn't remember things right. Sometimes he thinks Mother's still alive, and when we tell him she's passed, it's like hearing it for the first time. The doctor says his mind is going." They rode in silence toward the family homestead, a small ranch 3 miles outside of town where her father had raised cattle and horses for as long as Delilah could remember. The house looked shabbier than she recalled, the barn in need of paint, the fences sagging in places. Sarah had married a miner named Thomas who worked long shifts in the mountains, leaving her to manage the property largely alone. They had 3 children, all under the age of 8. "We can't keep doing this," Sarah said as they pulled into the yard. "Thomas makes decent money, but it's not enough to hire help, and I can't manage the children and father and the ranch. I wrote to you because I thought maybe you'd come back with a husband, someone who could help work the land, take over the ranch eventually." "I'm sorry to disappoint you," Delilah said, and she meant it. She felt the weight of her failure settling on her shoulders like the Colorado dust that coated everything. Her father didn't recognize her at first. He sat in a rocking chair on the porch, his face gaunt and his eyes distant. When Sarah said, "Father, Delilah's come home," He looked at her with such confusion that Delilah felt tears prick her eyes. "Delilah," he repeated. "The teacher." "Yes, father, from Philadelphia." He nodded slowly, as if processing information from very far away. "Your mother will be glad." "She's been worried." Delilah glanced at Sarah, who shook her head slightly. "Let him think it," she whispered. "It's easier." That first week back in Golden passed in a blur of adjustments. Delilah fell into a routine of caring for her father, helping with Sarah's children, and trying to assess the ranch's condition. It was worse than she'd initially thought. Several horses had been sold off to cover expenses, and the cattle herd had dwindled to fewer than 30 head. Without significant help, the ranch would fail within a year. "You could find a husband," Sarah suggested one evening as they sat on the porch after the children were asleep. "There are men in town, widowers, prospectors who struck it rich. You're educated, refined. That counts for something." "I'm also 34, Delilah said. "You wrote it yourself. Cowboys only want young brides." "Not all of them," Sarah insisted, but her tone was unconvincing. Delilah went into town the following Saturday to purchase supplies and to inquire about work. Perhaps she could teach again, earn money to hire ranch hands. The schoolhouse, a neat white building near the church, had a new teacher, a woman barely 20 who blushed when she spoke. The mining companies weren't hiring women for any positions, and the shops already had the help they needed. She was walking back toward the wagon, defeated and hot in the afternoon sun, when she collided with a man coming out of the general store. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water in shadow. He caught her arm to steady her, and his grip was firm but gentle. "My apologies, madam," he said, tipping his hat. His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas or perhaps Oklahoma. "No, it was my fault," Delilah said, flustered. "I wasn't watching where I was going." He studied her for a moment, and she had the strangest sensation that he was seeing past her dusty dress and tired face to something deeper. "You're new in town," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Returning, actually. I grew up here." "Bennett Hayes," he said, offering his hand. "I run a horse ranch about 5 miles north of town. Been here 3 years now. Delilah Preston." She shook his hand, noting the calluses, the strength in his fingers. "My father has the Preston Ranch east of town." Recognition flickered in his eyes. "I know it. Good land." "I heard Preston was ailing." "Yes." She didn't elaborate, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how people were glancing at them as they passed. "I should go. My sister's expecting me." "Of course." He stepped back, but something in his expression suggested he didn't want to. "Welcome home, Miss Preston." She thought about Bennett Hayes more than she should have over the next few days. There had been something in the way he looked at her, a quality of attention she wasn't accustomed to receiving. Men usually looked past her or through her, dismissing her as too old, too plain, too bookish. But Bennett Hayes had looked at her as if she were worth seeing. She scolded herself for the foolishness of such thoughts. He had simply been polite, nothing more. Besides, a successful rancher like him would want a young wife, someone who could give him sons and work beside him for decades. Not a spinster schoolteacher with more education than sense, and a father whose mind was slipping away. But the following Tuesday, Bennett Hayes rode up to the Preston Ranch in mid-afternoon. Delilah was in the garden, trying to salvage what she could of the vegetable patch Sarah had been too busy to maintain, when she heard hoofbeats. She stood, shading her eyes against the sun, and felt her heart do something foolish in her chest when she recognized him. "Mr. Hayes," she called out, wiping her dirty hands on her apron. "What brings you here?" He dismounted, leading his horse toward the fence where she stood. "I heard in town you might be looking for help with the ranch. I have a hand, good worker, but he's young and still learning. I thought he might benefit from working here part-time, learning different methods, and you'd get the help you need." It was a transparent excuse, and they both knew it. Delilah felt heat that had nothing to do with the sun rise in her cheeks. "That's very generous, but we can't afford to pay much." "He's on my payroll," Bennett said. "Consider it a neighborly gesture." "Neighbors 5 miles apart." She tried to keep her tone light, but her pulse was racing. "In Colorado, that's practically sharing a fence line." He smiled, and it transformed his face from handsome to devastating. "Besides, I remember your father from before he took ill. He helped me when I first came to Golden, gave me advice on the land, the water rights. I owe him." Delilah wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain her pride, but practicality won out. They needed help desperately. "That's very kind. Thank you. His name's Jimmy. He'll come by tomorrow morning." Bennett gathered his reins, preparing to mount, then paused. "Miss Preston, if you don't mind my asking, how long are you planning to stay in Golden?" The question caught her off guard. "I don't know. As long as my father needs me, I suppose." He nodded slowly, something complicated moving behind his eyes. "Good, that's good." Then he swung into the saddle and rode away, leaving Delilah standing in the garden with her thoughts in chaos. Jimmy arrived the next morning as promised, a freckled young man of about 19 who worked with an enthusiasm that both helped and occasionally caused new problems. But he was strong and willing, and he began making immediate improvements to the ranch. He fixed fences, mucked stalls, and helped move the cattle to better grazing land. Bennett came by 3 days later to check on Jimmy's work, or so he said. But he stayed for dinner, charming Sarah with stories of his travels before settling in Colorado, making the children laugh with tales of stubborn horses and ornery cattle. Her father seemed to have a good day, recognizing Bennett from years ago and engaging in coherent conversation about water rights and grazing patterns. After dinner, Bennett and Delilah found themselves alone on the porch while Sarah put the children to bed. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of orange and purple that made Delilah's chest ache with a beauty she'd forgotten during her years in the East. "I miss this," she said softly. "I didn't realize how much until I came back." "Why did you leave?" Bennett asked. He was leaning against the porch rail, his face half in shadow. "I wanted to teach, to see something beyond these mountains. My mother encouraged it. She had ambitions for me that couldn't be fulfilled here." "And did you fulfill them?" Delilah considered the question honestly. "Partially. I became a teacher, a good one. But I think my mother hoped I'd marry well, someone refined and educated. Instead, I just became more educated and less marriageable." "Less marriageable?" Bennett's voice held surprise. "Why would education make you less marriageable?" "Men don't want wives who know more than they do, Mr. Hayes. They want women who'll defer to them, who won't challenge them. And they want young women, women who have years of childbearing ahead of them." "Some men," Bennett said quietly. "Not all men." She looked at him then and found him watching her with that same intense focus he'd had outside the general store. "Most men," she corrected. "Especially cowboys and ranchers. They need practical wives, young and strong. Is that what people told you?" "It's what everyone knows." Bennett pushed off from the rail and moved closer, and Delilah found she couldn't look away from him. "Delilah," he said, and the use of her first name sent electricity down her spine. "May I speak plainly?" she nodded, not trusting her voice. "I'm 36 years old. I've been married before. My wife died 4 years ago in childbirth, along with our son." His voice roughened with old grief. "I loved her, and losing her nearly destroyed me. I came to Colorado to escape the memories, to build something new. And for 3 years I've kept to myself, focused on the ranch, told myself I didn't want or need companionship again." He paused, and Delilah waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Then I met you outside the general store, and something shifted. I saw intelligence in your eyes, strength, depth. I saw someone who'd lived, who'd chosen a difficult path and walked it. I saw someone worth knowing, worth more than knowing." "Mr. Hayes," Delilah whispered, but he wasn't finished. "I don't want a young bride who'll simper and agree with everything I say. I don't want someone who hasn't formed her own thoughts yet. I want someone I can talk to, really talk to. Someone who understands that life is complicated and painful and beautiful all at once. Someone who's survived disappointment and kept going anyway." "Why are you telling me this?" Her voice was barely audible. "Because I want to court you, Delilah Preston, properly if you'll allow it. I want to know your mind, your thoughts, your dreams. Not your womb or your ability to cook or any of the practical things people say matter. I want your soul if you're willing to share it." She stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "I'm 34 years old," she said, as if he hadn't noticed. "I know. I may not be able to give you children. I know that too. And if we're blessed with children, that will be wonderful. If we're not, it won't change how I feel about who you are. People will talk," she said weakly. "They'll say I trapped you, that you settled." Bennett laughed, a low, warm sound. "Let them talk. People always do. The question is, what do you want, Delilah?" What did she want? She'd spent so many years focused on what she should want, what was practical, what was possible, that she'd stopped asking herself what her heart desired. But standing here in the purple dusk with this man looking at her as if she were the most fascinating creature he'd ever encountered, she knew the answer. "I want to know you too," she said. "I want to understand why a successful rancher would be interested in a spinster schoolteacher. I want to believe that what you're saying is real." "Then let me prove it to you," Bennett said. "Give me time. Let me court you properly." She agreed, and thus began the strangest, most wonderful summer of Delilah's life. Bennett came by 3 times a week, sometimes 4. He brought books he thought she'd enjoy, and they discussed literature and philosophy late into the evening. He taught her to ride the new mare he'd brought for her use, and she taught him about poetry, reading aloud from Whitman and Dickinson while they sat by the creek. They talked about everything. His childhood in Texas, growing up the youngest of 5 brothers on a ranch that could barely support them all. Her years in Philadelphia, the loneliness beneath the supposed success. His marriage to Rachel, his first wife, how they'd grown up together and married young, how her death had left a hole in him he thought would never fill. Her failed courtships, the men who'd been put off by her education or her age, the slow acceptance that she might never marry. "I used to pray for it," she admitted one afternoon as they rode along the creek. "A husband, children, the life everyone said I should want. But then I started praying for purpose instead, for meaning, and I found that in teaching." "Do you miss it?" Bennett asked. "Teaching?" "Sometimes. I miss watching students discover ideas, that moment when understanding dawns in their eyes. But I don't miss the constraints, the way I had to be so careful about everything I said and did to maintain respectability." "You're more yourself here," he observed. She considered that. "Yes. For better or worse, I'm more myself." The town noticed their courtship, of course. Golden was too small for anything to remain private. Delilah heard the whispers when she went to market, saw the looks exchanged between the other women. Some were envious, some skeptical, some openly disapproving. Mrs. Thornton, who ran the boarding house where Delilah occasionally took tea, was particularly vocal. "It's unseemly," she said one afternoon, her voice pitched just loud enough for Delilah to hear. "A woman her age throwing herself at a successful man like Bennett Hayes. He's just being kind, anyone can see that. He'll tire of her soon enough and find a proper young wife." The word stung. even though Delilah had thought them herself in darker moments. But Sarah, surprising her sister with fierce loyalty, turned on Mrs. Thornton with blazing eyes. "Bennett Hayes is courting my sister because he's a smart man who recognizes quality when he sees it. If you're bitter because your own daughters couldn't catch his attention, that's your problem, not ours." Mrs. Thornton left in a huff, and Delilah hugged her sister tightly. "Thank you." "It's true," Sarah said. "I was wrong what I wrote in the telegram. I thought cowboys only wanted young brides because that's what we're taught to believe. But Bennett wants you, Del. Anyone with eyes can see it. He looks at you like you're water in the desert." But doubt crept in nonetheless. Late at night, Delilah lay awake wondering if Bennett was simply lonely, if she was convenient, if he'd eventually realize what everyone else seemed to think was obvious, that he could do better. Her father's condition worsened as summer progressed. He had fewer good days, more confusion, more moments when he didn't recognize anyone. Delilah sat with him for hours, reading aloud, holding his hand, telling him stories about her life in Philadelphia that he wouldn't remember the next day. Bennett helped without being asked, sitting with her father when Delilah needed rest, speaking to him with patience and kindness even when the old man thought Bennett was someone from decades ago. "He was a good man," Bennett said one evening after her father had finally fallen asleep. "You can see it, even now, the core of who he was." "I wish you'd known him before," Delilah said, wiping tears from her cheeks. "He was so strong, so certain of everything. Watching him fade is unbearable." Bennett pulled her into his arms, and she let herself lean against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. They hadn't kissed yet, hadn't done more than hold hands, but this embrace felt more intimate than anything Delilah had experienced. This was comfort, understanding, shared grief. "Death doesn't erase who someone was," Bennett said quietly. "Your father built this ranch, raised daughters who are strong and capable. He helped me when I needed it. That matters. That remains." In August, a traveling preacher came through Golden, and Sarah suggested she and Thomas renew their vows in a small ceremony at the church. It would be a celebration, she said, something joyful to counter all the sadness of their father's decline. Delilah agreed, though she felt a pang of envy she tried to suppress. Sarah had found her love, imperfect but real. Would Delilah ever have the same? The ceremony was simple but moving. Thomas, rough-edged and gruff most days, looked at Sarah with such devotion that Delilah had to look away, the intimacy of it too much. Bennett stood beside her, and when the preacher spoke about love enduring through hardship, she felt Bennett's hand find hers, their fingers intertwining. After the ceremony, there was a small gathering at the ranch. Neighbors brought food, children ran wild in the yard, and someone produced a fiddle. Dancing began as the sun set, and Bennett bowed formally before Delilah. "May I have this dance?" She'd never been a graceful dancer, but in Bennett's arms, she felt coordinated, even elegant. He led her through the steps with confidence, and other couples swirled around them. But Delilah was aware only of him, the warmth of his hand on her waist, the way he looked at her as if memorizing every detail of her face. "Delilah," he said as the song ended and another began, "I need to tell you something." Her heart seized. This was it, she thought. He'd realized his mistake. He'd say they should just be friends, that he wasn't ready for more, that he needed someone younger after all. "I'm in love with you," he said. The world seemed to stop. People kept dancing around them, the fiddle kept playing, but Delilah heard nothing except those 5 words echoing in her head. "You can't be," she whispered. "Why not?" He pulled her closer, improper by social standards but perfect nonetheless. "I've spent 3 months getting to know you, and every day I've fallen deeper. You're brilliant, kind, funny, resilient. You challenge me. You make me think about things differently. When I'm with you, I feel alive in a way I haven't since Rachel died. When I'm not with you, I'm thinking about when I will be. Bennett, I don't know what to say. Say you feel something too. Say I'm not alone in this. She looked up at him, this man who'd appeared in her life when she'd least expected it, who'd seen past her age and her spinsterhood to the woman beneath. I'm terrified, she admitted. I'm terrified this isn't real, that you'll wake up and realize you've made a mistake, that everyone's right and you should want someone younger, prettier, more suitable. Look at me, he commanded gently. When she did, his eyes were fierce. You are not a mistake. This is not a mistake. I don't want anyone younger or prettier or more suitable. I want you, Delilah, your mind, your heart, your soul, all of it. I love you, she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I've been trying not to, trying to be sensible, but I do. I love you. He kissed her then in front of everyone, a claiming kiss that left no doubt about his intentions. When they finally broke apart, the fiddle had stopped and people were staring, but Delilah didn't care. Let them stare. Let them gossip. For the first time in her life, she felt chosen, truly chosen, not for what she could provide but for who she was. Bennett proposed officially the next morning, arriving at dawn with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. He did it properly, asking Delilah's father first during one of the old man's clearer moments. Her father, confused but sensing the importance of the occasion, gave his blessing. Then Bennett found Delilah in the garden, knelt in the dirt and asked her to marry him. I don't have much to offer, he said, though they both knew that wasn't true. His ranch was prosperous, his future secure. But I can promise you respect, partnership, and love that sees you for exactly who you are. I want to build a life with you, Delilah. Not because I need a wife to cook and clean and bear children, though if you want those things too, that's wonderful. But because I need you. Your thoughts, your perspective, your presence. I'm asking you to share your life with me, your whole self, nothing held back. Yes, she said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, yes, yes. They married in September, a simple ceremony in the church with Sarah and Thomas as witnesses. Delilah wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, and carried wildflowers from the mountain meadows. Bennett wore his best suit and couldn't stop smiling. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Bennett kissed her, Delilah felt something settle in her chest, a rightness she'd never experienced before. The townspeople came to the reception, even those who'd gossiped and doubted. Mrs. Thornton actually apologized, admitting she'd been unkind out of jealousy. My daughters are married to good men, she said, but none of them look at their wives the way Bennett looks at you. Moving to Bennett's ranch was bittersweet. Delilah hated leaving her father, but Sarah and Thomas were there, and Jimmy had proven himself reliable enough to stay on full-time at the Preston ranch. Bennett had promised they'd visit often, and he kept that promise. They rode over 3 times a week, Delilah spending time with her father while Bennett helped with the heavier ranch work. Her father died peacefully in October, slipping away in his sleep. They buried him next to her mother on a hillside overlooking the ranch he'd loved. Delilah grieved deeply, but found comfort in Bennett's steady presence. He held her when she cried, listened when she needed to talk, gave her space when she needed silence. He understood grief in a way only someone who'd experienced profound loss could. Life at Bennett's ranch fell into a rhythm that felt like coming home. The house was larger than she'd expected, well built with glass windows and wood floors. Bennett had kept it neat but sparse during his bachelor years, and Delilah took pleasure in adding touches that made it a home. Curtains, rugs, books on shelves, herbs growing in the kitchen window. They worked together, true partners. Bennett taught her the intricacies of horse breeding and training, and she discovered she had an aptitude for it. She was patient with the animals, intuitive about their needs, and the horses responded to her touch. Bennett, in turn, asked her opinion on business decisions, read contracts with her, discussed plans for expanding the ranch. He valued her intelligence and never made her feel inferior for being a woman. Their physical intimacy developed slowly, carefully. Bennett was patient, understanding that Delilah had no experience. Their wedding night had been tender, somewhat awkward but full of laughter when things didn't go smoothly. "We'll figure it out together," Bennett had said, and they did. Over time, Delilah discovered pleasures she'd only read about obliquely in books, and Bennett proved himself an attentive, generous lover who seemed to delight in her pleasure as much as his own. But the question of children hung between them, unspoken but present. Months passed without pregnancy, and Delilah felt the weight of it even though Bennett never mentioned it. She was 35 now, and the likelihood of conceiving decreased with each passing year. "Does it bother you?" she finally asked one winter evening as they sat by the fire. Snow fell outside, blanketing the ranch in white silence. "That I might not give you children." Bennett set down the book he'd been reading and pulled her into his arms. "Honestly, always honestly. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about it. After losing my son with Rachel, there's a part of me that wants the chance to be a father, to do it right this time. But Delilah, listen to me." He tilted her face up so she had to look at him. "You are not a failure if we don't have children. You are not less valuable, less wanted, less loved. I married you for you, not for potential children. If we're blessed with a baby, I'll be grateful. If we're not, I'll still wake up every morning thankful that you're beside me." She believed him because everything about their marriage had proven his words true. He cherished her mind, sought her company, made her feel valued in ways that had nothing to do with traditional wifely duties. When she suggested starting a small school on the ranch for the children of neighboring families, he built her a schoolroom in one of the outbuildings and helped her spread word. 6 children came that first winter, sitting at rough desks Bennett had constructed, learning reading and mathematics and history from Delilah's patient instruction. Spring arrived, melting the snow and bringing new foals. Delilah spent hours in the barn, helping with difficult births, bottle-feeding the ones whose mothers struggled. She was mucking out a stall in late April when a wave of dizziness hit her so hard she had to grab the wall for support. Bennett found her there, pale and shaking. "What's wrong?" "I don't know, I just felt suddenly dizzy." He helped her to the house, insisted she rest, and called for the doctor despite her protests. Dr. Morrison, who'd practiced in Golden for 20 years, arrived that afternoon and examined her thoroughly. "Mrs. Hayes," he said with a smile that suggested he knew something they didn't, "when was your last monthly flow?" Delilah's mind went blank. She'd been so busy with the ranch, the school, life with Bennett that she hadn't noticed. "I don't know, January maybe, and it's late April now, Doctor." Morrison nodded. "I'd say you're about 3 months along. Congratulations." The word seemed to echo in the room. Pregnant. She was pregnant. At 35, after believing it might never happen, she was carrying Bennett's child. Bennett looked stunned, then overjoyed, then terrified. "Is she all right? Is the baby all right? What does she need to do?" Dr. Morrison laughed. "She needs to rest more, eat well, and try not to worry. Though at her age we'll need to be careful. I'll want to check on her regularly." After the doctor left, Delilah and Bennett sat together in stunned silence. Finally, Bennett said, "How do you feel about this?" "Scared," she admitted. "I'm older and Dr. Morrison said there are risks, but also happy. Incredibly, impossibly happy. Bennett, we're going to have a baby." He kissed her with a gentleness that brought tears to her eyes. "I love you. Whatever happens, whatever comes, I love you." The pregnancy progressed smoothly at first. Delilah experienced morning sickness that lasted most of the day for several weeks, but eventually it passed. Her body changed, growing round in ways that fascinated and sometimes alarmed her. Bennett was attentive to the point of being overbearing, insisting she stop riding, limit her teaching, rest constantly. "I'm pregnant, not fragile," she protested when he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of vegetables from the garden. "You're precious," he countered. "Both of you are. Let me take care of you." She learned to accept his care, even appreciate it. But she also insisted on maintaining some independence, continuing to teach her small school until she was 7 months along, and movement became difficult. Sarah visited often, bringing her children and offering advice from her own pregnancies. "It's different when you're older," she said honestly. "Your body doesn't bounce back as easily. But you're strong, Del. You can do this." In early November, when the first snow was falling and the mountains were white-capped sentinels, Delilah went into labor. It started in the early morning, sharp pains that woke her from sleep. Bennett immediately rode for the doctor while Sarah, who'd come to stay for the final weeks, helped Delilah prepare. The labor was long and difficult. Hours stretched into a full day, then into night again. Pain consumed everything, waves of it that left Delilah gasping and crying out. She heard Bennett's voice somewhere beyond the pain, pleading with her to hold on, to stay strong. She heard Dr. Morrison giving instructions, Sarah's soothing words, but it all seemed distant, separate from the primal struggle her body was engaged in. Finally, as dawn broke on the second day, she felt a tremendous pressure and then sudden relief. A baby's cry filled the room, strong and indignant, and Delilah collapsed back against the pillows, sobbing with exhaustion and relief. "It's a boy," Dr. Morrison announced. "A healthy, strong boy." They placed him on her chest, this tiny squalling creature with dark hair and a red face. Delilah stared at him in wonder, unable to believe he was real, that he was hers. Bennett appeared at her side, his face wet with tears, and together they gazed at their son. "He's perfect," Bennett whispered. "You're perfect. God, Delilah, I was so scared." "So was I," she admitted. "But he's here. He's really here." They named him Daniel Benjamin Hayes. Daniel after Delilah's father, Benjamin for Bennett's father, who died when Bennett was young. The baby thrived, nursing well and growing rapidly. Delilah had worried she wouldn't know how to be a mother, but instinct seemed to guide her, and Bennett was involved in every aspect of Daniel's care in ways that surprised even him. "My father was distant," he explained one night as he walked the floor with a fussy Daniel. "I want to be different. I want Daniel to know his father loves him, is present with him." Those first months were exhausting in ways Delilah hadn't anticipated. She was constantly tired, her body slowly recovering from the ordeal of birth. But watching Bennett with their son, seeing the gentleness with which he held the tiny body, the way he talked to Daniel as if the baby understood every word, made everything worthwhile. Winter passed into spring, and Daniel grew from a helpless infant into a baby who smiled and cooed and began to recognize his parents' faces. The ranch work continued, and Delilah gradually resumed her teaching, now with Daniel sleeping in a cradle in the corner of the schoolroom. The children were enchanted with the baby, and the older girls helped watch him during lessons. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and more chaotic than before, but richer somehow. Delilah had moments of such profound contentment that she had to pause and breathe deeply, anchoring herself in the reality of her blessings. She, who'd been told she was too old, too educated, too unmarriageable, now had a husband who loved her deeply and a son who bore both their features. But she also had moments of bone-deep exhaustion, Times when she wanted to weep from the relentlessness of caring for an infant while maintaining a household and helping with the ranch. Bennett supported her through those moments, taking Daniel for hours so she could rest, hiring help for the heavier household chores, never making her feel inadequate for struggling. "Everyone struggles," he said when she apologized for her exhaustion. "Parenting is hard. Let me help." Sarah visited one afternoon when Daniel was 6 months old, finding Delilah asleep at the kitchen table while bread dough rose forgotten beside her. She woke Delilah gently, finished the bread, and made tea. "You're doing too much," Sarah said bluntly. "I'm fine. You're exhausted." "Del, you don't have to be perfect at everything. Get more help. Let Bennett hire someone for the house for the teaching. You just carried and delivered a baby at 35. Give yourself grace." Delilah considered her sister's words. She'd been trying so hard to prove she could do everything, to show Bennett he hadn't made a mistake in marrying an older woman, that she'd pushed herself to the brink of collapse. That evening, she talked to Bennett about it. "I need help," she admitted. "More help than I've been willing to ask for." "Then we'll get it," Bennett said immediately. "Whatever you need." They hired a young woman named Lucy to help with the household chores 3 days a week. Delilah reduced her teaching to just 2 mornings a week. And slowly, she learned to accept that she didn't have to be everything to everyone, that asking for help wasn't failure but wisdom. Daniel's first birthday arrived with celebration. They invited neighbors for a party, and the house filled with laughter and food and gifts. Daniel, overwhelmed by the attention, clung to Delilah until Bennett scooped him up and made him laugh by tossing him gently in the air. "A year ago, he didn't exist," Delilah marveled to Sarah. "And now I can't imagine life without him." "That's how it is with children," Sarah said. "They expand your heart in ways you never expected." As Daniel grew into a toddler, curious and adventurous, Delilah watched Bennett blossom as a father. He was patient with Daniel's endless questions, encouraging of his explorations, gentle but firm with discipline. When Daniel took his first steps, both parents cried. When he spoke his first word, which was horse, unsurprisingly, they laughed with delight. The ranch prospered. Bennett's reputation as a horse breeder grew, and buyers came from Denver and beyond to purchase his animals. Delilah's school expanded to 12 students, and she found deep satisfaction in watching them learn and grow. Her relationship with Bennett deepened in ways she couldn't have anticipated, weathering the challenges of parenthood and business, finding new depths of intimacy and understanding. They made love less frequently than in their first year of marriage, exhausted parents falling asleep before passion could ignite. But when they did come together, it was with a tenderness and knowledge of each other's bodies that made up for frequency with intensity. Bennett still looked at her as if she were the most beautiful woman in the world, even when she was covered in flour or baby spit up or dust from the barn. "How did I get so lucky?" she asked him one night as they lay in bed, Daniel finally asleep in the nursery after a bout of teething that had kept them all awake for days. "Luck had nothing to do with it," Bennett said. "You were brave enough to come home when your family needed you. Brave enough to let me court you despite what people said, brave enough to believe in us." "They told me cowboys only wanted young brides," she said, echoing the words that had haunted her 2 years ago. "Everyone said it. Everyone believed it." "Most cowboys probably do," Bennett admitted. "Most men are fools who don't know what they want. But I'm not most men. I wanted you from the moment I saw you outside that general store, looking tired and determined and so beautiful it made my chest hurt. I wanted your soul, Delilah, and miraculously, you gave it to me." She kissed him then, pouring into that kiss all her love, gratitude, and wonder at the life they'd built. When they finally broke apart, she said, "I gave you my soul and you gave me yours, "Fair trade, I'd say," he laughed, pulling her closer. "The best trade I ever made." 2 years later, when Delilah was 38, she became pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first, her body less resilient, the nausea more persistent. But Dr. Morrison monitored her closely, and in the spring of 1889 she delivered a daughter. They named her Rachel Sarah, for Bennett's first wife and Delilah's sister, a joining of past and present that felt right. Rachel was easier than Daniel had been, a calm baby who slept well and smiled often. Daniel, now 3, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. The house rang with noise and life, sometimes chaotic, often exhausting, but always full of love. Delilah's teaching paused again during Rachel's infancy, but she found she didn't mind as much this time. She was learning that life had seasons, that her worth wasn't tied to constant productivity, that being present with her children while they were small was its own kind of teaching. Bennett, now 41, showed no signs of slowing down. He worked hard, expanding the ranch's operations, but he also made time for family. Every evening he came in from the barn for dinner, no matter how much work remained. Every Sunday they went to church as a family, then visited Sarah and Thomas, building connections between cousins that would last a lifetime. The years passed, marked by Daniel's growth, Rachel's first steps and words, the changing of seasons, the cycles of ranch life. Delilah's hair began to show threads of silver, and lines appeared at the corners of Bennett's eyes. But their love, rather than fading as some predicted, seemed to grow stronger, deeper, rooted in shared history and mutual respect. When Daniel was 8 and Rachel 5, Delilah resumed teaching more regularly, now with both children attending her school alongside the other ranch children. She loved watching them learn, seeing Daniel's quick mind grasp concepts easily, while Rachel struggled more, but persisted with determination that reminded Delilah of herself. The ranch continued to prosper, allowing them to make improvements. A new barn, an expanded house with proper bedrooms for the children, glass windows throughout. They hired more help, including a foreman who took over much of the daily management, allowing Bennett more time with his family. On their 10th anniversary, Bennett took Delilah to Denver for a week, leaving the children with Sarah. They stayed in a proper hotel, ate in restaurants, attended the theater. It was luxurious and strange after years of ranch life, and they found themselves oddly relieved to return home, to the familiar mountains and the children's excited welcomes and the ranch routines. "This is home," Delilah said as they stood on their porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Not because of the place, but because of what we've built here together. Our life," Bennett agreed, pulling her close. "Everything I wanted and more than I knew to hope for." Daniel grew into a thoughtful boy who loved the horses as much as his father did. By 12, he was helping with the training, showing a natural aptitude that made Bennett proud. Rachel, at 9, was more interested in books and learning, spending hours in the schoolroom even when classes weren't in session. She reminded Delilah of herself at that age, hungry for knowledge, asking endless questions. Sarah's children grew too, and the Preston Ranch, under Jimmy's capable management with financial help from Bennett, remained in the family. The families celebrated holidays together, worked cattle drives together, supported each other through illnesses and accidents and the ordinary challenges of life. Delilah sometimes thought about her life in Philadelphia, the woman she'd been at 34 when that telegram arrived. That Delilah had been resigned to spinsterhood, convinced her value lay only in her education and teaching abilities, certain that love and family weren't meant for her. She'd believed the stories everyone told, that cowboys wanted only young brides, that her age made her unmarriageable, that she'd waited too long and missed her chance. How wrong she'd been. How grateful she was to have been wrong. Bennett had wanted her soul, not her youth or childbearing years or domestic skills, though she'd provided those too eventually. He'd wanted her mind, her heart, her essential self. And in giving those to him, she discovered depths within herself she hadn't known existed. She'd learned she could love fiercely, mother devotedly, partner equally. She'd learned that her value wasn't tied to age or social expectations, but to the quality of her character and the choices she made. They celebrated their 15th anniversary in 1900, as the new century dawned. The children were older now. Daniel 17 and already taller than his father, talking about breeding horses and expanding the ranch. Rachel 12 and speaking of becoming a teacher like her mother. The ranch sprawled over hundreds of acres, prosperous and well-managed. Delilah's school had grown to include 20 students, and she'd trained 2 assistant teachers to help manage the classes. Bennett, at 51, had more gray in his hair but remained strong and vital. They'd weathered 15 years of marriage, the joys and sorrows, the mundane and the extraordinary. They'd buried Sarah's husband Thomas after a mining accident, helped her manage her grief while raising her children alone. They'd celebrated births and mourned deaths, survived harsh winters and drought summers, built something lasting from what had started as an unlikely courtship. 15 years, Delilah said as they sat on the porch in the June evening. The children were inside, Daniel reading while Rachel played piano, music drifting through the open windows. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, sometimes like no time at all. Both, Bennett said, taking her hand. Their fingers intertwined automatically, a gesture so familiar it required no thought. A lifetime and a moment. That's what happens when you're happy, I think. Time moves differently. Do you ever regret it? She asked, though she knew the answer. Choosing me instead of someone younger who could have given you more children, more years. Bennett turned to look at her fully, his creek water eyes serious. Delilah Hayes, I have never for one moment regretted choosing you. You gave me a partnership I never dreamed possible. You gave me 2 incredible children. You gave me your soul, which was all I ever wanted. Choosing you was the smartest thing I ever did. Even though I'm 50 now with gray hair and wrinkles and a body that's borne 2 children, especially because of those things. They're proof of our life together, the story written on your body and mine. I love you more now than I did when we married, Delilah. Every year, every day, I fall deeper in love with who you are. She believed him because his actions had proven his words true for 15 years. He'd never made her feel less valuable as she aged, never looked at younger women with longing, never suggested she was lacking in any way. He'd partnered with her in raising their children, managing the ranch, building their life. He'd respected her intelligence, valued her opinions, cherished her presence. As they sat there in the gathering dusk, Delilah reflected on the journey that had brought her here, the telegram that had shattered her resignation, the cowboy who'd seen past her age to her soul, the love story that everyone had said was impossible for a woman her age, that had somehow become the defining relationship of her life. Daniel came outside, tall and handsome at 17, so like his father, it sometimes took Delilah's breath away. Mother, Rachel wants to know if she can stay up late to finish her book. What book? Delilah asked, pride and prejudice. She says she's almost done and she has to know how it ends. Bennett laughed. Let her finish. I remember when your mother was teaching that book before we were married. She talked about it with such passion I almost read it myself. Did you? Delilah asked, eventually, After we were married and you kept quoting it, I wanted to understand what moved you so deeply. And did you? I understood that Elizabeth Bennet was valued for her mind and spirit, not just her beauty or youth. That Darcy learned to see past superficial qualities to the woman beneath. That love isn't about convenience or social expectations, but about genuine connection between souls. He smiled. Sound familiar? Our story, Delilah said softly. In a way. Except ours is better, Bennett said, because it's real. Daniel, listening to his parents' exchange with the patience of a young man accustomed to their romantic conversations, grinned. I'll tell Rachel she can finish her book. And that someday she should find someone who loves her the way father loves you, mother. After he left, Delilah leaned her head against Bennett's shoulder. We did well, she said. With him, with Rachel, with all of it. We did, Bennett agreed. We're doing well. Present tense. We're not finished yet, Delilah. We have years ahead of us still. And they did. Years of watching Daniel take over more of the ranch operations, eventually marrying a spirited young woman from Denver who loved ranch life. Years of watching Rachel attend university, the first woman in either of their families to do so, eventually becoming a teacher as she'd planned. Years of grandchildren, 5 in total, who called the ranch their second home and learned to ride horses under their grandfather's patient tutelage. Bennett and Delilah aged together, their bodies slowing but their minds remaining sharp, their love deepening into something unshakable. They celebrated 25 years of marriage, then 30, remarkable milestones for a couple that everyone had once doubted. The town of Golden grew around them, becoming more civilized, less wild. Colorado achieved statehood, then thrived. The world changed, bringing automobiles and telephones and technologies that would have seemed impossible in 1885. But the ranch remained, a constant in the shifting landscape, and at its heart were Bennett and Delilah Hayes, living proof that love could begin at any age, that souls recognized each other regardless of society's expectations. When Delilah was 65, she finally retired from teaching, her body no longer able to maintain the schedule. But she continued to tutor individual students, particularly girls who wanted education beyond what was typically offered. She wrote letters to former students now scattered across the state and country, maintaining connections that enriched her later years. Bennett, at 66, handed over most of the ranch management to Daniel, but still spent every day working with the horses. I'll stop when I can't walk, he told Delilah when she suggested he slow down. The horses keep me young. They marked their 40th anniversary in 1925, surrounded by children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, and friends. The celebration was large and joyous, a testament to the life they'd built together. As they cut the cake, Bennett whispered to Delilah, 40 years, almost as long as you'd been alive when we met. The best 40 years, she whispered back, worth waiting for. At 72, Bennett's heart finally gave out. He died as he'd lived, working with a horse he loved, Daniel, at his side. He simply stopped, pressed a hand to his chest, and collapsed. By the time Delilah reached the barn, he was gone. The grief was profound, crushing, a pain that seemed to split her in two. They'd had 37 years together, which everyone said was more than most people got, but it wasn't enough. It would never have been enough. She wanted 40 more years, 50, infinity. They buried Bennett on a hillside overlooking the ranch, next to plots reserved for Delilah when her time came. The funeral drew hundreds of people, testimony to the respect Bennett had earned in his years in Golden. But it was Daniel's eulogy that made Delilah weep. My father taught me many things, Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. How to train horses, how to manage a ranch, how to be a good neighbor. But the most important thing he taught me was how to love completely. I watched him love my mother every single day for 37 years. He never took her for granted, never treated her as less than his equal, never stopped looking at her as if she were the most incredible woman in the world. That's the legacy I want to carry forward. That's who I want to be. Delilah lived another 8 years without Bennett. They were lonely years in many ways, the bed too large, the house too quiet without his presence. But they were also full of love from her children and grandchildren, rich with memories of the life she and Bennett had built. She spent her days writing letters, spoiling her grandchildren, and waiting for the day she'd see Bennett again. She died peacefully in her sleep at 86, in the bed she'd shared with Bennett for 37 years. Rachel found her in the morning, looking peaceful, a slight smile on her face as if she'd seen something wonderful. They buried her next to Bennett, their graves overlooking the ranch that had been the center of their shared life. On her headstone, beneath her name and dates, Daniel had carved a simple phrase. She gave him her soul, and he treasured it forever. The ranch continued through the generations, Daniel's children and then their children maintaining the land and the traditions Bennett and Delilah had established. And always, the story was told of the unlikely romance between a spinster schoolteacher and a widowed rancher, the love that everyone had said was impossible, that had proven to be the most enduring thing either of them ever accomplished. They'd been told that cowboys only wanted young brides. They'd been told that a woman past 30 had no prospects. They'd been told that love required youth and beauty and childbearing years. But Bennett had wanted only Delilah's soul, and in giving it to him, she'd received his in return, and together they'd built a love story that defied every expectation, transcended every limitation, and lasted beyond death itself into the memories and lives of everyone they touched. In the end, that was the truth no one had told her. That love wasn't about age or beauty or social expectations. It was about two souls recognizing each other, choosing each other, and building something lasting from that choice. It was about respect and partnership, and growing together through all the seasons of life. It was about a man who'd looked past everything superficial to see the woman beneath, and a woman brave enough to believe him when he said she was all he wanted. And it was about proving that sometimes the best love stories begin not in youth but in maturity, when two people know enough about themselves and life to recognize something truly valuable when they find it, and wise enough to hold on to it with everything they have, for as long as they're blessed to keep it.